Welcome to Assumptions. This is the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian,
hi, that's me, Daniel,
sit down and try and understand each other's worldview.
We try
So hard. People probably don't understand this because they're getting a new episode every couple weeks into their podcast feed, but we actually have not seen each other for a few months.
It's been awful
at this point.
Are we friends? Yes,
I don't know. We do.
We are friends.
We actually never talk to one another unless it is on a podcast. So
it's a special rule. It really helps with your voice if you have a sore voice.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Only talk when necessary.
I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised to the sky.
Daniel, today we're getting together because we have actually reached the very end of our season 2, which has actually spanned about 7 months.
I know.
But season 2 has gone
all those
on
interviews.
took a lot. And there's some things that we, I think, learned by doing this entire season about ourselves, about the show itself.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be essentially part 1 of possibly 2 or 3 episodes. We're kind of going through the season and just kind of decompressing over what has happened.
Yeah, so part of it is that decompressing, just taking a step back and saying, what was the nature of this conversation? Because it was a different type of conversation, I think, than our last season.
Yeah, very much so.
And looking at that. But then also taking a look, as Kyle, we record these over the 7-month period. You listen back to the episodes as you edit them and you go, goodness, did I say that?
It's like, why did I say that?
Wow. No, this is wrong, Daniel.
Daniel's doing a really good impression of me because I could never have said that.
That's right. Or, wow, that was really eloquent. My goodness, they should pay these guys.
That's right.
But we have notes on those individual episodes and just reflections, things we've thought about since then. So if you've listened to the season up until now, this is a great chance to kind of hear our updated thoughts. If you haven't, I obviously go back and listen to those episodes. But I do think, even if someone hasn't listened to those episodes, what we are going to talk about on this next episode is going to be helpful.
Yeah, this episode specifically, we're going to talk about the season as a whole. And then starting in our next episode, we are going to be including some feedback from some of our listeners.
Yeah.
So there's some voicemails, there's some emails that were sent to us, and we'll be going through all of those.
Yeah.
So this entire season 2 of Assumptions, was subtitled Love in Our Time.
Yeah. It took us like
it took us so long.
half an hour to figure that out.
Yeah, it took us a while to figure out exactly how we wanted to phrase that.
I'm still proud of that, by the way.
No,
probably the
it's
best
great.
thing of this season was the title.
And it was all about relationships in all their many forms, whether that was for friendships, romantic relationships, familial relationships. It was this entire all-encompassing thing. And I think we always try and push ourselves to have kind of a high-level conversation about all of those topics. So I'll throw it to you first, Daniel. What was your overall feeling of season 2?
Anxious. It was a hard season to talk about, which, looking back in hindsight, I think I realized I kind of walked into this because I was like, Kyle, here we are, a Christian and an atheist that are friends. Like, it's a great pitch. But we were talking about movies before and storytelling. People want to hear the big stuff. Let's talk about sex. And I was kind of excited for it. And it just was so, it was hard. It was a hard conversation to have. And I think because on either side, like, we're sponsored by ATB. We're we're out there and we're talking about these things.
Proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB, by the way.
That's right. But so these kind of topics of sexual ethics are so controversial and celebrated in different ways out there. And so to have a minority view, perhaps like myself, on these things, it was just really nervous making to make. So there was that side of it. But then there was also the church audience, so the people that were coming from the conservative side that were then picking holes in what I was saying. And that actually did happen. There were a lot of pushback and conversations that took place because of the episode. So I think that just put a pressure on that actually I don't think is as natural to our conversation, our friendship, because when we normally have these discussions, it's just the two of us.
Yeah, we're just talking.
I know. And so that sense of pressure and that sense of people listening in isn't there all the time. And so it felt a little bit unnatural.
Yeah, and I think that there's some, like, when we are talking off mic, there are just having known you for a while and knowing how you speak and talk sometimes, I can fill in some of the gaps here and there. Whereas, like, you might phrase something which is awkward, but I know what you mean. I get what you mean, which doesn't sometimes necessarily cross over in someone who's listening via podcast.
Totally.
I'm very happy overall with the conversations we were able to have. I think it was a great idea to include interviews in this season.
Yeah, we got some good feedback from that.
I think we'll talk about this off mic. We don't have to do this on the podcast. I think there's maybe a better, more natural way to integrate those conversations into our podcast.
I also thought I wish we did all the interviews with the two of us.
I agree. I think going forward, we cannot do it where I'm doing some of them, and then some of them we're both here. I think we have to be in the same room to get that outlook from both of our perspectives.
Exactly. It was a little biased at times.
I agree.
Yeah.
So there's that. But the other thing, as far as like self-critical feedback, I think I really understood and was empathizing with you feeling a little bit nervous coming in and talking about some of these topics, where I feel that in some instances, in some conversations we were having, I held back a little bit and didn't push as far as what I kind of wish I did. I remember listening back while I was editing some of the episodes, like I should have probably like brought that point up there.
I feel the same way sometimes.
where I don't want it to sound like I'm just agreeing with what you're saying sometimes. I'm accepting what you're saying is valid to you, but sometimes I want to push back ever so slightly.
Whereas I had the same feedback from conservative Christian friends. Like, why are you agreeing with him on all these things?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
I think the perception is when we don't initially fight back. I don't like using that term, where we don't rebut back to the other person, that means that we're tacitly agreeing to the other point of view. And I think there has to be a better way to integrate that maybe a little bit into our show going forward.
We'll think about that.
But overall, I think I'm very happy with how our season actually turned out.
Yeah, I think once we got over the hump of those hard conversations, like my favorite episode other than some of the interviews, which were great, but my favorite episode was the community, the 2-part one at the end about community and singleness. Because I feel like those are the things, that's our natural sweet spot for conversations. And I hope our next season will come back to something that's a little more comfortable.
That's right. Which we have no idea what that's going to be about yet. Stay tuned. We'll let you know.
If you have ideas, let us know.
So we're going to go through each of these episodes that we released, plus the interviews that we released as well, and kind of just decompress a little bit over each one of them. So episode 1 was entitled We Are Family. Yep. This was literally talking about family and how we interact with that familial unit. And I know that, Daniel, you wanted to bring up something about heritage.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that when we planned that episode, the idea was, in my mind, to talk about our physical family. And it ended up, you talked a lot more about the sense of family being more than just, or maybe there was some of the interviews we had on there.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I was like, because I feel like that's a huge core part of my belief, is family not just being biological. But in my mind, I was saving those discussions for the community episodes. I kind of felt like, I didn't talk about that as much because I was focused more on the physical family. But we talked, one of the themes of season 1, Kyle, that I noticed from you is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the sense of wanting to leave a legacy. Yeah. And that being one of maybe your search for salvation in a way, to use that term loosely, being like your desire to have a legacy for yourself. And you talked about how that can come about through ideas, but then also the idea of having an actual offspring as being a legacy. And I was just thinking about how that can exist and I think of my family. My parents didn't have kids in order to have a legacy, but they did it out of a selfless act of love and of service and of contribution. And how that can exist even in a spiritual way too, or an ideas-based way, where if you're forming disciples or if you're forming like those kind of that spiritual offspring, that can be done to cause your name to be remembered, maybe a cult type. Thinking of The Master here, the movie Philip Seymour Hoffman. But if it's done right, it's more just out of generosity. It's not done out of legacy per se. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with that. I think that, I guess where I come from is that even if that is your ultimate goal, having offspring, having children is, no matter how you slice it, a bit of a selfish act as well. You might be coming at it as a selfless act, but you are still saying, I deserve to have my genes or my connective tissue be brought into the next generation. I want there to be another person in the world that shares part of my DNA into the world. And I don't know from a Christian perspective if that is necessarily how you're going into that marriage relationship, where we need to produce a bunch of more Christians so that they can spread out into the world. Necessarily, but I think that is the effect that will happen. And so I think that in and of itself is selfish.
Right. So you're not talking about just the sense of I want my genes, but you're saying I want more Christians. I want my ideological genes to continue.
I want the ideas that I have to also be propagated
Yeah.
throughout the world and stuff as well.
Yeah.
So as much as I love like my nephew and my niece, who's like, what is she now? 7 weeks or 8 weeks old now at this point. Love spending time with them. But my sister is selfish. But I mean, it sounds like I'm hating on kids. That's not my point of view. But I am saying that I think it is reasonable. And I think we have to be kind of intellectually honest with ourselves that there is more than enough people on the earth currently
Right.
to put it upon yourself to be like, I need there to be more people in this world. You might be coming into that selflessly, but I think there is a selfishness to that as well.
There's the whole adoption thing too. Like how does that play in? That's different. But as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of how you know this about me, that I'm kind of proud of my English heritage,
this
right?
This
little bit, yeah. But it's just thinking about nationality and how I think for both of my parents' sides, my mom's side being European, my dad's side being English, there was this sense of, it could very easily sneak in the sense I want to create more English people. Like I want that family, that blood heritage, that nation heritage to go on. And it can sneak in, I think, when I think about, I want to have kids because I want the Christian, the ethnic to grow. I want those ideas to grow. But I think that itself is a very selfish approach.
Right.
And it kind of, if that is a motive at all, I think I really need to examine myself as a Christian, because it's not about ideas or conquest or white supremacy. Like that's basically the same root, right?
I mean, that's what I was about to bring up. And like, I think that's why I'm so anti that sentiment currently in my life, because if you watch the news at all, you can see that kind of idea and that ideology being promoted a lot from what we now call the alt-right, but the white supremacists that are coming and bubbling up into our societies more and more and more is like, we need to make more white children so that whiteness is considered still like the best in the world. And I really recoil at that kind of philosophy in life.
But it's easy to, like, Annie and I have had this discussion about kids. And although we both love kids, and if that happens, great, we are very conscious of the sense of our spiritual family being, and the spiritual offspring that Barry talked about in our bonus episode is being very important to us, in the sense that we don't actually need to have physical offspring to have that happen. We can serve God and serve the world in other ways. But when I was thinking that through, part of the temptation is, I do kind of want kids just to keep that going. Like there is that temptation. And I think if it is, I have to ask myself and say, well, do I trust God enough? Am I doing this for my own motives, my own sense of trying to achieve something? Or can I trust God to grow the faith and to grow his family on his own without my physically doing that?
It's something I guess you'll have to figure out yourself. For me, like the legacy portion of it is,
just threw me in the box there. Figure it out, Daniel.
You figured it out.
Figure it out.
I'm not your therapist. I don't know. What's hard for me is that as much as I love my family, and I really, really do, there's always been a part of me that has felt very separate from them. Yeah. And I could point to maybe a few different things. I haven't psychoanalyzed myself enough to really discover what that root cause. So. Right. I mean, I think it's partly to do that I've always felt like that black sheep, where it's like I know that I'm wanting more than what the rest of the family seems to be comfortable with, where like my brother and my sister, and maybe I just have not had the right conversations with them, seem perfectly fine with me. Like, we're living in small town Alberta, we're just doing our thing, and that's perfectly fine. That's all we ever want to advance to. And for me, I've always like, I want more than just that life. And that's me being selfish for my own sake, I know, but it's like, I know that there's a yearning or a calling to accomplish more than what that can provide for me. And so that legacy idea is, if I can create something or make something or be a good enough person so that people want to talk about me even after I die, then I have kind of accomplished my goal, or I've become more than just that nobody in central Alberta. I have now become more than that, and then that would be my legacy going forward.
And I feel that stress a lot, that sense of wanting fame in a way, like wanting some sort of, not fame explicitly, but that sense of being known for something. And part of me really has to ask myself and say, is it enough to just be that nobody? And
Yeah.
is my contribution to the world by doing those nobody things that actually build society?
I'm
And
wanting
is
to
my
know,
contribution
yeah.
to God, yeah.
There's part of me that wonders if that's the big plot twist of my life, is that everything is leading up to me being just okay with
Yeah.
never being
Sure.
anything.
Yeah.
And
I
then
felt
being
that
like,
tension.
okay, well then I guess that's me now. It's
Yeah.
like I never attained anything that I wanted to, but I'm okay with that. And then
Yeah.
like that's
Maybe
what I
that's
learned
why-
and the credits roll.
Maybe that's why I love films like Patterson that just show this ordinary life.
Yeah.
You know, and his poetry doesn't survive to spoil the movie for you.
Thanks.
Have you seen Patterson?
I've not.
Wow. You should.
Go see 8th grade though. It's
It
great.
is wonderful. One of my favorite films. You asked me at one point what I would do different from my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked a little bit about just being more open to people like you, Kyle.
Yeah.
But one of the things I thought about when listening at it again was the sense of creativity and learning as being a culture of our home. And my parents had that, but I would definitely want more of that and to continue doing that. There's a great book by Andy Crouch called A Tech-Wise Family, which talks about can you cultivate that in a home that's filled with technology. And then the other one that just came to me was having a better body image, like just my kids being more comfortable with skin.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's because my dad was really English and I wasn't comfortable with it. Maybe it's because of the purity movement within evangelicalism that I grew up with. But that's one of the ones that came to me when I was listening to that episode again.
It's true. I've seen you go to the beach and you wear that 1930s swimsuit. It's really awkward and weird.
Episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2 was let's talk about sex.
Yeah.
This is the hardest one to have the conversation about. I think this is the one we were the most nervous to talk about.
I thought it was the bigot one. Christians
Oh,
are
maybe
bigots.
so.
Yeah.
I felt that I was maybe the most nervous about
Okay.
episode 2. But I think the conversation that we were having specifically around guilt and
Yeah.
education, I think is
Yeah, yeah.
what I'd like to pull out from
Yeah.
that
Talk to me
episode
about that.
specifically.
Yeah.
Where this is actually fairly relevant here in Canada, here at least.
Hmm.
If you don't know, there was a new premier that was elected into Ontario very recently. Doug Ford
Right.
is the new premier over there, and one of his first acts was to roll back the sex education
Right.
that was in high schools
Right.
to be what it was in the 1990s, I think.
Okay.
I think it was 20 years. So
Okay.
I think that goes back to the 1990s. There's a lot of pushback
Yeah.
by a lot of different groups. And it's actually getting kind of nasty in that he has opened up a snitch line so that if any parent hears a teacher that is not going back to the old curriculum, that they can be ratted out and maybe fired. Anyways, very weird and awkward stuff going over.
Orwellian
Yeah,
kind of-
that's going over in Ontario here currently. That's not specifically what I want to talk about, but what I think that shows me is that, hey, I grew up in the 90s. That's when I was having my sex education in schools. And while I think there was some good stuff about that, I still don't think it went far enough to really understand what the realities of sex are and were. And why I still promote education first. And I think that, yes, that it's more than just education.
Is that your tagline when you run?
What's that?
Education first.
Education first.
Yeah.
Vote Kyle. Please don't. So here's the big thing. I think sex encapsulates a bunch of different areas, and I understand why parents get a little bit hesitant for their children to hear about it. But I think that we can talk about safe sex, first and foremost. I'm not a proponent of just talking about abstinence and being like,
Right.
just don't have sex.
Right.
It's not realistic,
Right.
number one.
Yeah.
It's actually been very proven that abstinence-only education leads to more teen pregnancies. Because if you're just told, just don't do it, just don't do it, just don't do it, and you're
Yeah.
not actually given reasons why
Right.
you may not want to engage in that right now, then you're doing a disservice to those people that are learning about it. It is no surprise, and I talked about this, I had a lot of guilt myself about not only my sexuality, but the idea of sex itself. I think going back to your body image thing, I think that was part of it, is like not feeling comfortable in my own skin,
Yeah.
firstly.
Which is a cultural thing too, like just seeing so many airbrushed,
Right.
airbrushed,
Yeah, right.
blushed bodies.
If you've ever, I think porn has a lot to do with that too,
Yeah.
which has some really bad effects on kids and
Yeah.
even adults. But it's
Especially adults.
probably. But I think what the education failed to do in the 90s was, number one, kind of getting into the whys behind things, meaning like, when is sex appropriate? Why is it appropriate? Like the actual, and this is going to sound like a pun. It's not a pun, but the ins and outs of sex. For me, I think even when I had like my first time, I didn't actually really know what to do. Like I literally did not know what to do. I knew like the mechanics. I understood like what pregnancy was. I understood like all of that stuff, but I still didn't I don't know actually what to do here. And I felt awkward and I felt embarrassed and I just didn't. It was not a great experience, especially when it was with someone who I felt probably knew a lot more than what I did. And it's not that I necessarily think that education needs to go let's go into the nitty gritty details of
Act
stuff.
one.
Act one of students. It actually reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, but they have a skit about sex education in schools, and it's the teacher and a woman who comes in and he shows them how sex works.
Awful.
It's awful, but it's really great.
And of course, that's going to go in the show notes.
Of course, it has to.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a clip out there somewhere. For me, I think we do a disservice to kids by not being realistic about different orientations, different reasons why you might have sex, and being okay if you don't want to have sex, and it's okay if you're not even sexually interested in anybody. There's the asexuals and stuff out there too.
I guess my question when listening to that episode, and it's come up actually a couple times in listening even to interviews you've done with folks, the sense of guilt around sex, and something that you mentioned in your childhood and kind of dealing with guilt. Now, guilt is a broad topic. I struggle with guilt in many areas, but the impression that I got from that episode was, and this maybe sound a little bit simplistic, but the guilt comes because we don't have enough education on sex. And if we were to educate people more about what sex is, that guilt would go away. And my question is, what if that guilt is actually saying something about human nature and what sex is? And that there is a reason you feel guilty about sex stuff, partly because we're flawed humans that are fallen and in need of redemption, so we're going to feel guilty, but partly because sex is designed for something else. And if we abuse that, we're going to feel guilty about it because it's more than just, eating the wrong meal. There's a different level of guilt, between other bodily functions, like eating badly. Yeah. But versus sex.
I think you're hitting on something that's really relevant, and I think I agree to you up to a point, which is I think that it's more than just education. I think that people feel guilty even if they had all the education in the world. I think that we compare ourselves to other people, and we want to be the best at things when we attempt to do them.
So you're talking more about guilt in terms of awkwardness rather than there being something intrinsically moral to the sex act.
Yes, I think that is fair to say. Okay. I don't think that I'm feeling guilty because sex is on a higher level than other things necessarily. I think that there's a lot of human nature wrapped up into reasons why we feel guilty, and I think it's partly guilt most of the times, in me at least, presents itself because either I grew up myself believing it was wrong, or it was presented in media or by my parents that, hey, this is a bad thing to do, so that if I engage in something like that, then I'm doing a bad thing, and now I feel guilty for doing that bad thing.
So your guilt is coming from moral upbringing and conditioning rather than an intrinsic awareness.
I believe so, but I might have to unpack that a lot more with myself before I can conclusively say that, but that feels correct to me.
Okay. Yeah, whereas, my argument, as you know, is that there's something else going on, that there's sex. Is more to this act, which in a sense, I just, as I'm thinking back on what I said, the sense there being a difference between eating and, I think what we do to our bodies do matter because we're made in the image of God. And so even if you eat crappy, you're going to feel bad spiritually in a way. If you don't exercise, if you don't take care of the body God's given you, we're not just souls and a body. The Plato split is, I don't believe that's biblical, that we are a unified being. When we, in the new heavens and the new earth, we will have bodies. And so there's, even our eating and even our other physical habits have implications, but there's something especially poignant about the sex act that intrinsically connects you to another person. And it's cleaving two people together in a very unique way that, has biological purposes and pleasurable purposes, but that very act is a gift that does something to you and causes you to desire that person and want to be with that person. And so to treat that lightly will cause guilt because we're not made for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I could jump into with that, but I don't want to make this episode necessarily 3 hours long. I guess the only thing I bring up here, it seems, even though I understand that the biblical teachings are made for both men and women.
Uh-huh.
I get that. It seems though that like sexual ethics and sexual rules have always felt more authoritarian over like keeping women in line than it is for men in line, right? Because you always have, I mean, I'm using the Catholic Church mostly for my example here on this, but you have male priests, right, who are celibate,
right,
but preaching ethics to the congregation, and especially in any biblical stories I've heard of, but you'll probably have some good ones that I have not heard of, where anyone who is being held up for adultery is usually a woman who's being held up for adultery, not a male that's being held up for adultery. Right. So it always seems that it's more punishable, like women are more punished for those acts than it is for men to be punished by those acts. And it has always felt like we're trying to keep women in line than it is to try and keep all of mankind in line.
Yeah, it's another conversation for sure. But I think first acknowledging that is how the Christian world has treated it. So those in power that have been Christian, have done that. And you see that both in Old Testament times as well as in the church era. But and the sense that the Bible isn't written in a vacuum, it's written within a cultural context. So there are going to be polygamy in the Old Testament stories, not because that's God's plan for the world, but because those are the stories that took place. Like, this is the people that God was dealing with at the time. But if you look at what the biblical worldview and the biblical story has to say about women, it's profoundly countercultural, especially at the time. The first witnesses to Jesus' resurrection were women. And a lot of the church's authority came from that, which was unheard of at the time. And if you read accounts of first century Christians versus the Roman era, they were growing exponentially through women, because women found that they were valued in a world that wasn't valuing them at all, because God values them. So there's that tricky, there's a thorny nature, because Christians haven't done a good job of paying attention to this. But I think there's a lot more going on there than just that impression. And there's some profound stuff going on in terms of what the Bible has to say about how valued women are in the sight of God. That wasn't happening culturally.
Right.
Yeah.
Jesus was a hippie. Hi, everyone. Once again, this is Kyle breaking into the conversation to let you know a few things. As always, Assumptions is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, there are so many great shows to listen to. Shows like The Work Not Work Show, Girl Tries Life, The Fourth Line, or, and I admit this is completely self-serving on my part, Creative Block. Kyle Marshall of Media Lab YYC, wait a second, that's me, interviews artists and entrepreneurs about where they came from, what they're doing now, and where they want to go. I think there's been some phenomenal conversations. Check out all the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Also this week, we are helped by LitFest. Edmonton is the home of Canada's first and only non-fiction festival. LitFest runs October 11th to 21st and features dozens of events with writers from across the country and beyond, all sharing true stories and big ideas about culture, food, science, politics, and more. Among the writers are award-winning poet Billy Ray Belcourt, musician and documentarian Dave Bedini, and Dr. Brian Goldman of CBC Radio's White Coat, Black Art. Festival passes are only $129. For being a listener of Assumptions, you can get $5 off by using the promo code APNROCKS. That's APNROCKS. Get your tickets today at litfestalberta.org. Also this week, we are helped by the ATB. ATB knows that being an entrepreneur and business owner has its challenges. That's why they've created their entrepreneur centers. So whether you're dreaming, building, or growing, you can access a powerful set of tools to help your business and personal finances grow together. With locations in Edmonton, Calgary, and Lethbridge, and monthly pop-ups across the province, it's just one more way ATB is helping to reinvent banking. Visit atbentrepreneurscenter.com to find a location nearest you. Thanks everyone for listening. As you'll soon find out, Daniel and I talked longer than we thought we would. But our next few episodes are very, very good. That's all I can say. Just very, very good. But for now, let's get back to our wrap-up of Season 2. Okay, so episode 3
Spencer
was entitled "I Am What I Am,"
Uh-huh.
and this was basically me telling my story of like coming out and coming to terms with my own sexuality. What questions do you have for me from that?
I thought it was interesting how you connected with. It's funny, like going back through this episode, this podcast, and just like my own memories that are associated with it. For example, I was editing the family episode on the way to the airport to see Annie for the first time. We've been dating for 3 months at that point. But it's just all these memories are just associated with my life. But you mentioned Roseanne, which is just kind of hilarious because that's blown up since then. Yeah,
what a bad example you used in that.
But it just struck me that you said that it's important for others to be treated as people, and how representation of that really what made a huge impact on your story. And I just thought like that should be important to Christians too, because every person is made in the image of God, and
what is so weird to me, and it's so buck wild, is that Roseanne? You have. I was going to bring her up. Is that you have her in real life, like on Twitter, railing against like black people and a bunch of other things that eventually got her fired. But you actually have her show that got actually rebroadcast onto TV. Well, not rebroadcast. There was like a new season that they made here this past year. Yeah. And if you actually watch that show, like that persona does not come anywhere near those characters. It's the exact opposite. There's an entire episode about her standing up for the rights of Muslims in America. And it's like, how are these two people the same person? I don't get it.
But I guess my point was just being that sense of representation. I believe that it does matter.
It does matter.
People
Absolutely.
As people.
You
is
see,
super powerful.
You see that actually going on right now specifically. There's a movie that's out in theaters, and whether you like it or not, that in itself is not important, but it's called Crazy Rich Asians. Yeah. I actually did go and watch it. Yeah. But it's the first all Asian cast in North America.
Wow.
In the last 20 years, I think. So it's been 20 years since the last movie was made, which I think was the Joy Luck Club, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow,
anyways,
that's crazy.
It's been a long time since there's been an all Asian American cast in a movie. And I don't think it's just like having those types of movies where the entire cast is one thing. I think it's just having representation of those people show up in your sitcoms and in your movies, and being like, oh, they're not just the token person here that comes up and says a funny line, but they're actually integral to the plot. I think that Star Trek has always been that way, which I've always respected about it. But I think that Star Wars is getting that way now too, even though there's some pushback from fans.
Fans are the worst.
Yeah. But you see that in a lot of media now, where their inclusion of different gender identities and different sexualities and different backgrounds, personally, I think adds to a more interesting show, but also is making it so that those people don't feel so like alone and be like, there's literally no one like me being shown to me at all.
And as a Christian, I'd say that it gives a fuller representation of who God is, because if all these different races and personality types and disabilities, and if that's a representation of who God is, they're all made in the image of God, then we need to see more of that.
I actually would say that the thing that Hollywood could actually do a lot better with is something that we're doing right now, which is having different faith being really presented in honest ways.
The Big Sick was...
Yeah, The Big Sick was great. It was like my favorite movie the year that it came out.
I think that we should just... Hollywood should hire us to be...
That's right.
Pretty much.
Hire me as a screenwriter, please.
One of the questions that... Or just the impressions I had from that episode, you talked about like the sense of you thought that your sexual complications, you mentioned, were because God perhaps picked you out for that. And that being tied, because you have mentioned the guilt several times on this, and I was wondering I wanted to acknowledge that. And
I think it's wrapped up in a whole lot of things. I think there was, based on a lot of stuff that was going on in the family at that time, I remember being yelled at a lot as a kid. So kind of this constant I was being reprimanded a lot growing up, and that kind of instilled in me. Wow. That I was like, oh, I just want to be good, like that sense of wanting to be a good person, whatever that
follow
means.
The rules and get
I need to follow the rules, and that will make me become a good person. Wrapped up in like, oh, who I actually am as a person is not being upheld in the Christian ideal of what like a great Christian is.
Sure, yeah.
So it's more cultural identity. That's another failing of myself, and I couldn't tell anyone what was going on for fear of, reciprocation and stuff like that. So I think it's all wrapped up into this idea. Like I was always anxious as a little kid because I knew I was different. I was always being yelled at, and I said, I just want to be looked at as a good person, and I felt like I wasn't, and I could never be. And so that was my cross to bear, to borrow an analogy.
And that's just, that's hard to hear. Just the fact that you were yelled at as a kid a lot. Didn't have that growing up, and that hurts. I think the other thing that had an impression from just hearing this now, but then also when I listened to the episode, was the sense that the brokenness, the sense of feel like wanting some sort of restoration, and that for some, like for you probably experienced that in worse ways than maybe I did growing up. But we have all experienced that as humans. It's part of being human and being broken and wanting to be whole again. And so I just deeply resonated with that. Yeah.
Well, our next episode was Christians Are Bigots.
This was the episode that got the most amount of trouble.
You had to issue an apology afterwards,
I did,
right?
Yeah.
So what do you want to pick out from this? I mean, I know that you were talking about God's authority and that his advice is wise and good. What is it that what got you in the most trouble?
Well, I mean, if you want to hear more about, I think we issued shortly after episode 5, I think.
Yeah.
Or 6, was it? That I issued a clarifying statement. Episode 6, where I issued a clarifying statement just talking more about what came across wrong on that one. But the question I want to bring up on that was the sense of, you had this complaint, if I remember correctly, about authority. The sense of like, is someone telling me to do this?
Yeah.
And I guess there's 2 thoughts I have on that. And the first is that sense of desire for self-autonomy. You see it a lot in kids, right? Like this, I'll do it my way. Tell them to do one thing and they'll turn around and, don't pull the cat's tail. That's the first thing they're going to do is pull the cat's tail.
Like literally, don't do that. Pops the balloon.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, literally is what he does.
And but that also if you look at the kind of the emotional arc of the biblical storyline, that's human rebellion from God is, no, I'll do it my way. You tell me not to eat, I'll eat. Like I'll do the exact thing you asked me not to do. So that it just identified like being like, Kyle, this is an example of you rebelling against God. But that instinct, right? Being like, well, God can tell me to do that. Like that's a very human instinct. Milton would have thought that was the great thing about the fall, is that it encouraged that in humans. So I just wanted to recognize that is.
That is, I think, by far the biggest stumbling block I have in modern Christianity or religion in and of itself, which is that intellectually I understand the appeal to be like, I am supplicating myself and I am giving myself over to a higher power and knowing that they're going to carry me through the hardships because I am, letting go of the trappings of humanity, right? I can be like, no, God is going to carry me through this. Yeah. I don't have to worry about it because God has my back.
Yeah.
So I understand that intellectually. What I push back a whole lot is the idea that, well, this deity or this person, I shouldn't say person, this deity, this figure has laid out these conditions and these rules. And I feel outside of like the 10 Commandments, some kind of ambiguous natured rules. It's not like he just came in like, listen, this is the thing. And like just listed a bunch of stuff for people to follow.
Right.
It's been a lot of interpretation from like prophets and other apostles and stuff like that, which in and of itself, I think is going to get corrupted by human filters.
Yeah.
What I come back to is like, okay, great. These are your rules and these are your commandments and these are the conditions you're setting out for humanity to follow. But I always want to know the why behind that. You need to give me the reasons why these are what are so important to you. And then I'm stealing this. I know we just mentioned 8th Grade.
Oh, the film.
The film 8th Grade, which is directed by Bo Burnham, who I've been a big fan of for years and years.
He liked your tweet.
He did like my tweet. Yes, I was very
honored.
Basically, I'm royalty now.
Yeah.
No, he in one of his stand-up specials, which are more like little plays than they are stand-up specials, but in one of them, he mentions he has this song called "From God's Perspective," which I think everyone should. I think we should actually have an entire episode on just that song. But be as it may, he's listing off some of the things that we're supposed to be doing, being like, well, why does he even? He swears, but like, why does he care? Like, literally, he's created the heavens and the earth. Why does he care what we do down here on earth? And I feel the same way, which is like, if I was this person, like this supernatural figure who made an earth, why do I care what they do at the end of the day? I'm so powerful at that point that I could just kill them all right now if it really bothered me that much and start over from scratch. So why is he trying to get us to act a certain way? Like,
Right.
what's in it for him
Right.
for us to act in that way?
Well, I'd say one of the first things just in that comment is that you didn't create a universe. You're not all powerful. So that itself, the fact that you're not that,
Correct.
and he is, means that like
Or she is.
but that the God is means that you like there's that itself is one of the conditions. It's like, okay, well, if God did do all this and I didn't, maybe I should listen to what he's doing.
Sure. Okay.
But then part of it too is saying like his character, God's character is just. His character is to show mercy to others. His character is love. There are all these. So the way that he wants humans to behave are an outpouring of his character. And then I'd also say that if your understanding of, I mean, I say a lot of religions are rule-keeping religions. And I'd say the distinction of Christianity is that it's not a rule-keeping religion. It's a religion where you can't keep the rules. And I think that's why the rules are there, to show you that, yeah, these are human standards for behavior. If you follow these, humans will get along better. 10 Commandments, like if you don't covet, if you don't murder, if you don't lie, and if you serve God, things will be better for humans. But the fact that we can't do that means that we're not going to achieve our salvation by achieving rules, by following those rules. Instead, God loves us so much that he sent his son to die for us and to fulfill those rules for us. And so what comes then is a relationship, rather than just a strict rule keeping. But that relationship comes out of the character of God rather than just the obedience to the rules. And as I was thinking back on that episode, you had asked, like, why does God tell these things about sexual ethics? And I guess part of it is if you recognize God's character as good, and you recognize his character as having created a world for the joy of it, and for the joy of, well, his own joy for one purpose, but also our joy as humans, well, then if it's kind of like an architect. If an architect designs a beautiful building or a beautiful park and then says, well, here's how to best take care of this park, I probably should listen to those, because he's giving me those rules out of wanting myself to thrive rather than out of a tyrant trying to kill my joy.
Right. And I guess that's my thing too, is that the character of the all-powerful is all well and good until his character is subverted somehow. And you saw that a lot with kings and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Like not an omnipotent king, but a king who was nice to his people, right? He always wanted to support them the best way.
Benevolent king?
A benevolent king. Thank you. That's the phrase I was trying to think of. A benevolent king is all well and good until they go senile, and then they just start killing people off as much as they want to. I worry that sometimes that might happen as well. And
God just starts going senile.
Yeah, you never know. He's getting old in age right now.
But I guess it comes down to like his character, like his character unchanging, and I believe it is. So I know his character, and that gives me a lot of comfort when I deal with my own guilt. It's like his character is to show mercy, and his character is to uphold justice, and that's the terrifying part, because I haven't done justice. And that's where the guilt comes from. I haven't done what's right. But his character is to show mercy, and that's not going to change. And I have proof of that character through what he did through Jesus. If he, God incarnate, went to such ends for me, that proves that his character is loving. And he's shown that to me in the years that I've known him. And I've had that relationship with God. I've seen his characters being loving and being caring and being generous. And that gives me great comfort when I'm dealing with guilt and dealing with my own failings.
That's great. I mean, I guess it always just comes back to, I know that the constant refrain here is that, like, I know he is, or my belief is that this is what's going on. There's still no tangible proof. And I don't know. It's not that it's even like I need 100% proof on that, but it would be, I feel like the same way is as if I try to justify certain things, which you've pushed back on, like, I believe the sky is green because I believe the sky is green. Right. It's kind of like a snake eating its own tail. Where it's like, I believe it because I believe it. Right. But there's actually where is the actual location of that belief within that structure? Episode 5 though was I'm going to die alone.
Gorgeous.
Daniel, in that episode, I asked what attracts you to other people, and I think you have a better answer now.
Yeah, I as I said when I recorded that episode, I was about to meet Annie for the first time, and so I was a little coy, reticent to talk about things. But you kind of caught me off guard with that question. I was thinking about it, and I was thinking it through the lens of my relationship with Annie. It's like, what do I like about? Well, okay, what attracts me to someone? Well, what attracts me to Annie? And I boiled it down to 3 categories here.
Oh my gosh!
So this is a public love letter, I guess.
She
knows I'm doing this, by the way.
Okay.
So the first category is someone who has a sense of curiosity and a sense of creativity. So finding wonder in the world and finding one of the things she told me before we were dating is that what she looks for someone is someone who loves to learn and someone she can learn with. And that's something that I see in her. So that attracts me as someone who has a sense of creativity, that's always doing things and always finding new ways to cook or ways to bring art or ways to be creative in her life. And then also that sense of curiosity and wanting to finding things interesting and finding things interesting. So and then the second category is it's a kind of broad category, but life. Like I'm attracted to the sense of life in someone. Like if someone,
the other person does have to be alive. Yes, Daniel. I would hope that would be true.
But the sense of it's something that a friend of mine when I was deciding whether or not to date her, so like she has life in her face, and it's just if someone has a sense of enjoying life and of being excited about life and finding things interesting in life, that attracts me to them. Mm-hmm. That's and then the third category is a steadiness and a sense of there's a real sense of calm to Annie and a sense of maturity to her. And that part of that for me is the steadiness in the faith. Like she's mature in her faith and she knows God, she knows Christ well. And as we've worked through our own issues together, she keeps having this solid foundation in knowing who Jesus is and knowing what the gospel is. And that pours out in her life and just a steadiness and a calmness.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the 3 categories.
What are the 3 categories again?
Curiosity and creativity.
And
then life and then steadiness.
That's
curiosity
multiple
and creativity.
categories.
Like I'm bringing those together. Curiosity, cretivity.
Okay.
They're connected. Okay. Don't you think? Curiosity and creativity are
good.
connected?
But it's like I have 3 categories, but there are actually 4.
Yeah.
And those are all actually the same things I look for in cauliflower when I go and buy that. So
that's just sad. The other thing that I thought about when thinking back on that episode, because we talked about the tensions of dating and just, is this the person for me? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that has defined my relationship with Annie is the sense of joy of every stage in that relationship. Because when you start dating someone, there's a sense of, well, like, are we going to work out for each other? And where are we going to end up? And it's so easy to have this expectancy about those future stages, which is good. And, it's an important part, but there has been this sense of enjoying each stage. When I think back on our first, even before we were dating, just getting to know each other, I'm so happier that we're more established in our relationship now. But I think back on that period with joy. It was fun. Mm-hmm. And when we first started dating, the first couple of weeks and months before we actually met each other, I much prefer this stage, mm-hmm. but I think back on that and I was great. Like I would do it again. Like it was great. It was wonderful. Yeah. And I think for me, and this is where my faith comes in, a lot of it is knowing that even though I have the tension of not knowing what's coming down the pipe, I can trust the one who does know and trust that things will work out because God is guiding both of us. And that brings a sense of rest that then gives room for that joy.
Well, I hope to attain that someday.
Okay, this has been a great discussion, but we're not done the season yet.
I know. So this is kind of pulling back the curtains here a little bit. We actually just did an 1.5 hour long recording, and it's a bit too long, I think, to throw into people's podcast feeds. So we're splitting this into 2 parts.
Yep.
Daniel, until we see each other again, or as people hear us again in 2 weeks, what's the best way people can get in contact with you?
If you just Google me, Daniel Melvill Jones, but my website, danielmelvilljones.com.
Mm-hmm. And then for Assumptions, you can see us everywhere, which is at AssumptionsPod. So that's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. AssumptionsPod@gmail.com is another great way to get in contact with us if you want to. And my own personal best way is probably Twitter. So I'm at the Kyle Marshall. That's Marshall with 2 L's. So until next time, when we finish off this conversation,
that's right.
Have a great week. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Awkward.
We did that in stereo. That was great. Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melvill Jones. This episode edited by Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. Most of the music in this episode is from the band the Parson Red Heads. You can check out their music anywhere digital music is available. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that we referenced, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together and are attached to this episode. It's always a superb document that he puts together. Thanks for listening to The Credits. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks.